The immortal John Hancock here with another ranking video of Sega published games for the Genesis. This is for the year 1990. I made a small mistake with my previous video for 89, and there was a few published games that should have been in that year. I'm including them with this group with a total of 19 games I'm going to be discussing in this video. The purpose of breaking them up by year is so that it is more manageable, so that I can take a look at the wide variety and library that Sega published in the US. And in today's video, I'm looking at the year 1990 mostly, and talking about the amazing games that Sega released in this year. Some good, mostly good, some not so good, but I'm going to give them a ranking from S to F, and I'm going to be sharing with you my thoughts on why I give them the grade. And the perspective is looking at the games today, going back and revisiting these games today. What do I think of these, playing them again? So sit back, relax. You may want to grab some popcorn. Here we go. I'm typically a big fan of action platformers, and Alex Kidd and Enchanted Castle is not my cup of tea. I've tried to go back and enjoy this, as you know, I'm a big Sega fan. I've played the other Alex Kidd games. This one has the rock, paper, scissors where you used to fight bosses, and I just don't like the standard generic layout design of the levels. It's a C for me. Truxton is an enjoyable vertical shooter, and one I like to go back to. Old school, it's got some amazing power-ups. One of three, you have like the spread type red power-up, green, and my favorite blue, which is devastating lightning that takes out everything on the screen. So this is a very, very enjoyable, satisfying vertical shooter with awesome enemies. It is very difficult. I recommend this highly. It's a total A for me. I really enjoyed going back and playing Afterburner 2, as I think it's a faithful representation of the arcade classic. And you know what? Sega did a good job taking all that arcade goodness and representing it on limited hardware for the Sega Genesis, a fairly earlier release. I love the different settings, evening, day, night. The control is so-so, and there's some graphical limitations, but this is an enjoyable arcade port, and it's a B. Castle of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse is old school platforming goodness, and I really enjoyed what they've done with level design, gameplay mechanics. While a little bit slow, you can butt bounce on enemies and gather apples using those as projectiles. Simply stunning. This is a really good and faithful representation of Mickey Mouse in a video game. Well, I totally give this game an A. Columns is a puzzle game that easily gets overshadowed by the more popular Tetris, but wow, going back and playing this Sega classic, I was immediately transported to an amazing puzzle scene where it's two-player co-op, it's got great gameplay, and it's a faithful representation of the arcade game. It's a total A for me, and if you haven't played this, you need to check it out. I tried to go back and play Cyberball, but you know what, for me, the control of this game kind of kills it. Each button does the same thing. There's no yardage in this game. You're trying to score a touchdown before the ball diffuses. Very difficult. I know there's fans of this arcade port, but I am not one of them, as I would rather play any other football game on the Genesis library. Avoid. Notorious for its bad cover art, Dynamite Duke is an arcade port that, well, falls short for me. I am a fan of games such as Cabal and Operation Wolf, and this pales in comparison to fun gameplay compared to those two, as it's difficult to avoid shots. The cumbersome controls really doesn't do it for me. It's a D for me, and play something else. ESWAT is an average game that I tried to like more. Unfortunately, as you progress later in the game, the controls become sluggish. And so it starts off kind of the run-of-the-mill action platformer, but you get this cool mech suit, and you know, that's where the game does try to be awesome. Unfortunately, the controls kind of ruin it for this game to be above average, and so at the end of the day, I'm giving this a C. I thought Ghostbusters on the Sega Genesis is one of the best versions of this franchise in 16-bit form. And while the original release excluded Winston, there is a special edition that has been made by fans that is adding features and makes the game even better. But going back to the original release, boss fights, upgradable weapons, and I like the 8-button directional fire control. This is a great action platformer, and to me, it's an A. This next one I hold near and dear to my heart, and this is a game I grew up with and played with my brother, and that's Herzog Zwei. And this is a real-time strategy game where you control a mech that can transform into a jet. You deploy units to take out an enemy's base. Awesome, different levels to explore and check out. Simply fantastic. It's a must-play on the Sega Genesis. It's one of my favorite games to play, and you must play this. Hands down an S, and one of the best on the console. I really struggled to go back and replay James Buster Douglas Knockout Boxing, as I think there's other better boxing games on the Sega Genesis. The side-scrolling boxer is mediocre at best, but actually I really didn't like playing this at all. It was just a button mashing, boring experience, and for a boxing game, it's an F for me. Play any other boxing game. Admittedly, I played a lot of Madden back in the day, and I didn't have a lot of experience playing Joe Montana football. And going back and playing this, I actually was pleasantly surprised at how well this holds up. And it can be compared to like an original Madden style game. I don't like it as much as the Madden franchise, but going back, this has a lot to offer. Not as many playable teams, but it has an arcade feel. Passing is a little difficult, but overall, it's a B for me. I enjoyed it. Aside from the controversy of Michael Jackson himself, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker is amazing. Fluid gameplay, great soundtrack. I've never played really a game like this, and I enjoy going back and playing this as it's simply fantastic. I'm a big fan of this side-scrolling action platformer, and you know what? I think if you're a fan of anything Michael Jackson, you owe yourself to go back and play this. This is an A for me and a solid addition to the Sega Genesis library. There are lots of sports options for the Sega Genesis. I've played many of them. So going back and playing this early sports title from Sega, Pat Riley's Basketball, it reminds me of kind of a discount double dribble. The ball is supersized, sluggish controls, too easy to steal. I do like the animations when you dunk or get close to the rim, but man, this is a D for me. Many other sports games on the Sega Genesis are much better. How did Sega follow up the immensely popular original Phantasy Star for Sega Master System? Well, they made Phantasy Star II for the Sega Genesis, and it was epic. Going back and playing this on an old save state, wow. This just transported me back to an awesome 16-bit era time for RPGs, and I truly think it's a classic on the library. Many of the things that made the original are back here. This is an A for me and one of the better RPGs for the console. While many would possibly rate this next game higher, I like it, I just don't love it. For whatever reason, I have a hard time getting into the original Strider. It's a really good arcade port. And, you know, for many people, this is going to be like, you know, top tier for them. For me, I'd rather play Ghouls and Ghosts, as I think it's a much better game. And so I'm going to give Strider a B. It's a good arcade port, but not my favorite, but pretty solid still nevertheless. Depending on what type of racing games you are into, your mileage with Super Monaco GP may vary. But this is kind of a pole position style 16-bit racing game. I did enjoy the detailed graphics, though, you know, your rear view mirror and other things take up a portion of the screen. It is a single player experience, but I enjoyed going back and racing with this one. It's a B. Sword of Vermilion was an early RPG entry for the Sega Genesis, and you know, it's going to be compared to games such as the franchise Phantasy Star, but I think it has its own merits. Excellent sound, and had 4 different perspectives. Had kind of a town perspective, a dungeon perspective. Combat was in real time, and then it switched to a side-scrolling for boss battles. You know, the combat was so-so at best, and there are some issues with the gameplay mechanics, but overall, a great solid RPG experience and a B for me. Zoom is an odd one I didn't have a lot of experience growing up with, renting, and going back and playing this literally for the first time. What do I think of it? It's different. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Kicks, but I'd rather play Ultimate Kicks on the Sega Genesis and not this. While fairly unique, I think this puzzle game is just average at best, and you may want to play a different puzzler. And all the games that I showed today and a total ranking here. And you can rank these yourself. What did you think of my rankings? Do you agree with them? Have you played any of these? Did it take you back to yesteryear where you played these or rented these or played them in emulation? It doesn't matter. We're having fun here talking about some Sega classics, and I look forward to continuing this series and doing all the games that Sega published themselves year to year on my channel. Thank you so much. If you like what you see, consider hitting that like and subscribe button and clicking the bell as I'm uploading videos every week. You folks are wonderful and beautiful. Let's keep it positive. This is the Immortal John Hancock, and you take care.